What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Puddle of Grunge podcast. I'm Ryan, and Colby's not going to be here with us today, but we've got a special guest coming on the podcast today to do a little interview for us. One of the iconic concert photographers from the era, I'd say. Absolutely admired his work for quite a bit now, and he's been a supporter of the page for a bit now. So I'll let him do more of his introduction, but without further ado, I'll give you Paul Jendrasiak.
Well, when I was 18, I was a few days out of graduating high school. I was a long hair guitar playing kid at that time. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could get an interview with Gene Simmons of Kiss? And I didn't have any experience, didn't have any connections. And there was a local music magazine where I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan called Music Review. And I called them up because I knew Kiss was coming to town and talked to the editor over there. His name was Bruce, been a longtime friend of mine since then, and said, I'd like to get an interview with Gene Simmons. And within a few days, I was able to figure out who his publicist was and get a hold of her. And a few days later, I had Gene Simmons on the phone, and that was my first interview. And as you can imagine, if you've seen Gene Simmons' Family Jewels or anything, Gene
Hmm.
Simmons, pretty intimidating. And
Larger than life personality for sure.
oh, absolutely. So
Yeah.
I figured, if you're going to dive in at the deep end of the pool.
Hmm.
And so I got into doing what I did with photography through, I guess, way of interviewing. I was going to a lot of shows at the time. So this was 1990. And so when I was a teenager, hair rock, hair metal, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
was big. And I got all these magazines, Hit Parader, Circus Magazine, you name it.
Yep.
And saw all the photographs in there by photographers like Neil Zalozauer, Ross Helfand, Ken Settle. I was like, oh, well, I really enjoyed the photography. And since I was at all these shows, since I started doing interviewing, I thought, well, what if I was able to take pictures? And I got a photo pass, and my dad had a camera that Pentax camera from the 1950s that used to be my uncle's. So I took that to a place called Club Eastbrook, which was like the venue that a lot of people were coming through in
Hmm.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. And first show I photographed wasn't actually a rock show. It was a comedy show. It was Tim Allen. I'm
Oh,
sure you know
really? Yeah. Yeah.
Tim Allen, who, went on to become the pure Michigan voice. I'm sure if you're there in Indiana, you
Oh,
got a lot
yeah.
of people trying to lure you up here to Michigan to
Oh,
take your
yeah. See it
vacation.
on TV all the time. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go. And so he was doing his show at the time. I think it was called Tool Time. And so he's doing a stand-up act. And so I took photos of that. And then a couple weeks later, the Black Crowes came to town and they were just doing their first album, Shake Your Moneymaker.
Mhm.
And so I took photos of that. But I kind of knew at the time that I needed, for lack of better words, a more modern camera. So my dad took me out to the camera store at the mall. There's a place called Ritz Camera, and I got a nice new Nikon camera,
Mhm.
and just kind of kept shooting shows, figured it out, and started shooting slide film, which magazines back then wanted you to shoot slide if you were going to be potentially published if you were shooting color stuff. And so just kind of, figured it out for myself. It's not like now, you go on Facebook, there's groups for concert
Yeah.
photography and all that. You just put a camera in your hand and went up to the stage and started taking pictures after you
Yeah.
got a photo pass. And you don't have the luxury like, say, you do today, you're shooting digital. I mean, you've got that instant gratification, whether you got the shot or not.
Yeah.
You're shooting film, so you're trying to make sure, well, is the exposure right? Hopefully, it's not a blurry photo. And when you're shooting concerts, the lighting is changing all the time,
Hmm.
and sometimes the lighting is certainly not the best. And so there's a lot of things that, you're kind of working with. But, in the first year of my photography, I was fortunate enough to take pictures of folks like Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains,
Oh yeah.
Megadeth, Anthrax, lots of these bands, at the
Hmm.
time, they were small bands. Nobody knew who Pearl Jam was at
Yeah.
the time. They were a opener for the Chili Peppers
Yeah.
and
I've
Smashing Pumpkins.
got a poster of the Lollapalooza that they opened for the Chili Peppers up there, actually.
Oh, right
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
So were you photographing them when they were going by Mookie Blaylock or just a little bit after
no.
that?
So they were Pearl Jam at the time,
Okay.
but nobody really knew who they were. It was
Hmm.
like pretty much almost literally a week later, they hit radio and MTV and they were all over. And so kind of your thing about Mookie Blaylock, which was interesting, is probably about 3 years later, I walked into this independent record store downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan. I wasn't shooting pictures anymore at
Hmm.
that point, and saw some bootleg CDs. And I was like, oh, there's one of Mookie Blaylock, which became Pearl Jam, and
Yeah.
it was called the Mookie Blaylock Demos. And I was like, oh, that photo looks familiar. So it's a photo that ran in Kerrang magazine
Hmm.
over in the UK, and somebody scanned it out of there and put it on the cover of that bootleg. So I was like, oh wow, that's kind of cool to see that. But yeah, you're right. They started out as Mookie Blaylock. They came out of Mother Love Bone, and I
Yep.
always think of Mother Love Bone as kind of the missing link between the
Yeah.
80s rock and 90s grunge.
Yep.
And you always kind of wonder what would have been
Yep.
had Andy Wood not passed. But it's just kind of interesting to see how all that connects.
Yeah. Um, Man, that's a great answer. So you said something in there about shooting digital and then like nowadays shooting digital versus film. Do you prefer to shoot digital or film because of the instant gratification aspect or kind of the adrenaline rush, knowing you might not have gotten the perfect shot, but you could have, and it'll turn out great if you shoot it on film?
Well, as I mentioned, I, started shooting pictures in 90, and I probably quit shooting pictures in 94, and I didn't shoot anything again in 2010. So I don't know, maybe it's like what, about 15 years or so.
Mm.
So in that time, everything went to digital. So the first big show I shot again was Elton John in
Oh,
2010. So
nice.
digital's nice for knowing that you got the shot, but I think what you'll hear from a lot of photographers is nothing beats the quality of film. It's hard to reproduce
Hmm.
a certain look and a certain aesthetic. Um, so, I mean, there's pros and cons on both sides. I've
Yeah.
shot film again within the last few years at a few shows. I used to photograph back in the 90s on something called Ilford. And the thing that was nice about that, I wasn't like a guy who was going in the dark room and processing my stuff. I mean, to be honest with you, I go to the mall. Maybe this
Hmm.
is the most 90s thing ever. And you go to those 1 hour photo mats, and most
Yep.
of those places didn't do black and white, but Ilford had what was called the C41 process, which is the same as, if you're shooting, Kodak film or something
Hmm.
like that, that you get in an hour. So I figured that out. So I like go take my Ilford there to a lab called CPI Photo Finish, and I'd go across the hall of the mall, and then there was Olga's, which is this restaurant. I have great spinach pies, so I'd have a spinach pie, enjoy myself, and then come across, and my photos would be ready. And then it was kind of cool. You know, 2019, I talked to the folks over at Ilford, and they profiled me, and I had shot some roles in their film, a band called Rival Sons.
Hmm.
And so I thought it'd be fun to shoot some film again. And so I actually used the camera that I used to shoot all my 90s stuff on, which was Nikon. And so yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons both ways,
Hmm.
whether you're shooting digital or film, but there's certain things that you're not going to beat with film, and then there's different levels of quality of film nowadays. There's like cine still film, which
Hmm.
is like cinema type film, and I've shot a few things on that. So, every so often I'm like, well, I want to shoot film just for shooting film for fun.
Hmm.
But mainly what I shoot is digital stuff.
Yeah, I have a film camera over here, because I had to take a photography class in
Okay.
college, and we actually had to develop everything in the dark room and everything, which is an awful experience. It's very hard, as you probably know. But once you get the hang of it, I'm sure it's a lot easier. But yeah, I was gonna say I definitely, just the sound of a film camera over a digital camera and the click and everything just kind of gives it an extra experience that you don't really get with digital that I've really enjoyed.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, the darkroom experience is certainly a fun thing. And,
Hmm.
if that's something you want to do for a hobby, I mean, I think that that's cool. And it's fun to kind of watch that picture develop,
Yeah.
so to speak, while it's in there and see how that, comes about. And then you can do certain things with that photo while it's developing. I mean, of
Hmm.
course, if you're, doing stuff digitally, you can do that within those digital programs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of, the idea of being able to do, certain things like burning and dodging, bring this out, or maybe kind
Yep.
of have a certain aspect not as much of a point of interest or whatever you want to call it. But I mean, I would encourage, and I think, you see a lot of people who pick up digital and they become pretty proficient at it,
Hmm.
then to just, shoot film just for the
Yeah.
fun of it. But nowadays, I mean, it's the whole thing of you shoot something, uh, if you're shooting for, say, a publication, you need to have those photos edited and sent over, within a
Hmm.
matter of minutes. So it's, used to be, you'd shoot something, you go back to a dark room or wherever, have them developed. And so there's this whole thing of, time is sped up with, first of all, you see the picture, then you can edit it quicker. So it's interesting, the trajectory of all of that.
Hmm. Well, awesome. So as a photographer, your job is obviously to capture moments in time that are sealed forever in a picture in a way that a video just can't capture. Um, so what's been your favorite moment to capture on camera?
I think, going back to a lot of those 1990s shows, I mean, shows that um, come to mind are, Alice in Chains. I shot them a couple of times.
Hmm.
Pearl Jam, Blind Melon, Tool. And, there's an interesting thing, and I don't think this just applies to, say, myself, as far as, we're talking about the type of content that I'm shooting, which is music, which has a connection to culture. But you shoot something at the time and you're like, okay, yeah, that's a cool shot. But you fast forward sometimes 20, 30 years into the future, you're going to view that shot a little differently. I shot a picture
Hmm.
of Billy Corgan in 1991, and he's playing this Fender
The
Stratocaster.
Gish
No,
guitar?
yeah, the Gish
Yep.
guitar.
Yep.
I didn't know any relevance of that guitar until like 2018, 19.
Hmm.
And you find out, okay, well, that guitar was stolen and then it was returned to him.
Yep.
So, you took a picture in 1991, somebody sees that and say, wow, that's a cool picture. And then somebody sees it 20, 30 years later, they're going to look at that picture a little bit different and say, oh, well, isn't that a guitar that was stolen? When, well, of course, Billy Corgan has hair. And
Yeah. Yep.
no, but it's just like, your pictures. I mean, if you got, family pictures in a box, you look at them 20, 30 years later, you may view them a little bit differently than you did the moment that you first saw them. It's like you could say like, well, a picture develops, within a few seconds, a few minutes, whatever. Well, I think sometimes at some level a picture develops over a lifetime. What does
Yeah.
that picture mean? What's the relevance of that picture? Whether it's somebody who shot something that's related to culture, or just something that you shot in your backyard with your family.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I totally agree. I was gonna say the Smashing Pumpkins one is typically the one that I see, and most of the time people are pointing out that Billy Corgan has hair. So
I
I think that's funny.
used to
So
have hair too, so
hey, happens to everyone, I'm already going gray, so um so what's the band or artist that you have enjoyed shooting over the years out of everyone that you've done?
Well, I guess there's a couple of answers, I suppose. 1991, I was fortunate to shoot photos of Pantera, and I
Yeah.
was lucky enough to be on stage, but nobody really knew who Pantera was at the
Hmm.
time. And that show was kind of a war zone, but kind of in a fun way because, Phil Anselmo, he's just up there
Crazy energetic, everything.
stage
Yeah.
and all over the place. You don't know what he's going to do. And then you've got the crowd and the intensity of that. So you're just kind of looking in all these different directions. But I was fortunate enough to, get some super nice pictures of them, especially
Mm.
of Dime. And,
Yeah.
he was a really cool dude to photograph, like to have fun on stage with the
Hmm.
camera. But kind of fast forwarding, I photographed a lot of stuff of Buddy Guy, and
Hmm.
as the years go by, you realize how much of a treasure somebody like Buddy Guy is,
Yeah.
and so that's always something that sticks out in my memory is a show that I really, or a number of shows that I really enjoyed photographing, and then you see. The interesting thing is you look at a lot of these musicians, and sometimes it's the ones who are getting older,
Mm.
and you can tell who is really, has a genuine love of it. They're not out there just because, I think there's always a perception of, well, a lot of these people are set,
Mm.
they've got that bank accounts. And some of them are, touring because, they got to keep up
Yeah.
life. But other people, you look at them like a Buddy Guy or a Willie Nelson, and you can
Mm.
tell what incredible joy they have for being out there. It's what they do, and if they couldn't do it, that they would truly miss that.
Yeah. And I've seen your shots of Buddy Guy and just the emotion in his face when he's playing on the polka dot guitar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's really unmatchable, I'd say. And like you said, especially with the older guys, like I saw Clapton a few years back, and just his emotion on stage, knowing that it was, you know, getting closer to the end of his career and everything, is something really special to witness. So
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, because you never know what it's going to be the last time when you see
mhm,
somebody. And I think I photographed and saw BB King, maybe it was about a year before he passed.
man,
And you know, you I saw him standing there before he went on stage, and you kind of just take a look, and you see in their eyes their life, what they have experienced. So you kind of
yeah,
just take a moment and process that. So I mean, a lot of these artists, if you have the chance to see them, and some of them it's going to be your last chance. You just
yeah,
don't know. I think it's certainly worth it. And there's been artists that I've photographed that I mean, thinking of like Coco Taylor, Queen of the Chicago Blues, fortunate enough to have photographed her back in the 90s.
mhm,
And you don't really have a lot of artists with certain levels of emotional quality that you did back then. I mean, certain people, I mean, you could go up there and play that role, but it's more importantly somebody who's lived that role,
Yeah.
and you can really, I think, distinguish that. And to have seen some of those folks, I'm very grateful
Mhm.
to have had that opportunity.
Awesome. So this is kind of a personal question, but what is your
Sure.
personal favorite band from the 90s?
I mean, I mean, would say Alice in Chains. So
Me too.
when when I was a teenager, I was into hard rock,
Hmm.
hair rock, whatever you want to call it, Rat, Van Halen, Motley Crue, all that stuff. So when grunge alternative came around, even though I photographed a lot of that stuff, I wasn't into a lot of that
Hmm.
stuff. But Alice in Chains for me was kind of a connection to that stuff.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of those bands that maybe I wasn't like super into or whatever back then, I revisited when I was scanning stuff in
Hmm.
years later, and I have, a great affection for them. I mean, Tool, for example,
Yeah.
fortunate to have photographed them after Undertow came out. Maynard went to art school in Grand Rapids in the
Hmm.
80s, and he did a show in Grand Rapids after Undertow came out. I was fortunate enough to photograph that, and then you look back at that years later, and you don't somebody who has the opportunity to photograph Tool now, it's a whole different
Yeah.
setup.
Oh
You're not
yeah.
able to get that close or anything. So
Hmm.
you look back and realize, how fortunate. But yeah, I would say Alice in Chains, but kind of is the years have gone on. I have a great affinity for Tool. I mean, there's
Hmm.
always these memes about, Tool fans,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the complexity of their
Oh yeah.
music and what Maynard has done. I mean, they're all such incredible musicians.
Yeah. I
Also,
mean, Danny Carey is just an absolute monster as well. Yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And at some level, I mean, you kind of you look back and it's like some of it's all built on the Led Zeppelin song
Oh yeah.
Kashmir. And you can kind of see the connections to that. And I know in Maynard's book, he talks about the Led Zeppelin record with Kashmir on it. And I think he always had some weird incidents connected to
Hmm.
that. But, you can listen to a lot of that stuff from back there. It's like, being able to hear people's influences and how
Yeah.
they took that. And it's not, they didn't copy it, they took it somewhere
Hmm.
else, so you can really appreciate that. And there's like, the bass playing, drawing a blank on the bassist's name, and
Justin Chancellor. I got
yeah,
you.
Justin.
Yeah.
I know uh, Paul was the bass player when I had
Hmm.
saw them in the 90s, but Justin is just such an amazing bass player. I mean, I think sometimes the bassists are the unsung heroes,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
he is just a phenomenal talent, and just the way that band moves and operates.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's awesome. I just saw Jerry this last weekend from Alice in Chains, and
Oh,
he's like,
wow.
yeah, he's like my personal guitar hero. So, um,
Yeah, he's fantastic.
yeah, and I saw them like 2 years ago, and yeah, it was a whole show. But yeah, they're
They,
yeah.
I saw them the last time in 2014, and even though Lane has passed,
Mm,
they're still amazing,
yeah,
and they, they really honor that, and I think that that's great, and they're able to create great new music, which I
yeah.
think is fantastic. But Jerry is just an incredible guitar player.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have a replica that I made of his blue dress guitar
Oh
out
wow.
of a Kramer like guitar, and got the stickers on it and everything. But yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So yeah, personal hero of mine, but awesome to know that they're also your favorite band.
Oh yeah,
Um
you betcha.
so uh have you ever been injured while shooting a show? Because I know there's kind of like some hazards down like in the pit area, or like cables and stuff running. Have you ever like tripped over anything, or like dropped a camera or stuff like that?
Well, no, never dropped a camera. I mean, there's times you're changing lenses where you just
Mhm.
gotta, if you don't have a second camera body on you for some reason, where you're kind of a bit nervous. But the craziest thing that ever happened was Skid Row back in 1992. Um, it's like you're always if there's pyros, you want to kind of be in the
Yeah.
loop on when those are going off, where
Hmm.
those are going off. And so I knew that there were pyros at the Skid Row show. And so I knew when they were going to go, and that was fine. And so the next thing you know, I think towards the end of the first song, you hear this big bang out of nowhere. There wasn't supposed to be a pyro.
Hmm.
So somebody threw up like an M80 from the
Oh.
audience, and it blew up right in the pit area, like above it. So, you looked, and then there's some dude who's got blood coming down his arms, and I think somebody unfortunately had their eye damaged really
Oh man.
bad. But it's just like, you don't know what's going on. But fortunately, they caught the guy, like even made MTV News back
Hmm.
then. Uh, Kurt Loder talking about it, and but yeah, it sucks that somebody had some pretty serious damage
Yeah.
to their eye because somebody thought it would be fun or funny to throw something up and blow up. So I mean, that was probably the craziest thing. You know, back in those days, I mean, you'd have a lot of people who were uh, crowd surfing or mosh
Yeah.
pits, or people would be throwing their shoes up on stage. I
Yeah.
mean, apparently they didn't need to wear them home. Um, and you'd see like a Reebok pump fly by your head or something like that. Um, but it was funny is years later, photographing Phil Anselmo, um, the crowd was pretty tame. I
Hmm.
mean, they were in their 40s or 50s.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think a mosh pit wasn't on their menu at
A
that.
dad mosh pit. Yeah.
Yeah. But back then, I mean, it was no joke. And so you're kind of watching over your head. I mean, if you're like photographing somebody like a Slayer or a Megadeth, you don't want to get the back of somebody's foot to your head or something
Yeah.
like that. But you just kind of learn to photograph stuff within those parameters.
Yeah. Keep your head on a swivel at all times, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, okay, so how do you decide which moments to capture during a show? Like, will you get a set list beforehand, or like can you see it up on stage, or do you just go based off the energy of the crowd and the band, or how do you decide what moments to capture?
Well, usually most shows, I mean, and it's been this way since I'd say the 90s, it's usually the first three songs that you're going to be able to
Hmm.
photograph. As far as moments, I mean, you may know what moments are going to happen because you've got YouTube, so you could go look up that band
Hmm.
on there, see what goes on within the first three songs. But for the most part, it's just you got to go with instincts and intuition
Hmm.
in the flow of what's going on is really kind of what it comes down to as far as that goes.
So, what's a band or artist that you wish you could have shot but never got the chance to because they either passed away or they just retired?
Well, I mean, if I could go back in a time machine, I'd love to photograph Van Halen back in
Oh
their
yeah.
heyday, the late 70s, early
Hmm.
80s. That certainly would have been amazing. I mean, of course, say somebody like a Jimi Hendrix.
Oh yeah.
But I think that you you had a certain energy in a lot of that stuff back then. Now it seems like it's more curated at a certain level,
Hmm.
very formulaic. That's not to say that there aren't, artists out there who just have, a certain magic to them, but
Yeah.
it's always changing. And I think every generation can say that about the generation that was behind them. I
Hmm.
mean, somebody who grew up in the era of Woodstock would have said, well, yeah, that's not like it was in, the 90s. What we had was, better or whatever. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't, I mean, I guess I would use the word different. And I mean, everybody has their own personal generational experiences. So I don't think you can really, tread on somebody else's. They've got what they've got. And I mean, we're fortunate now with YouTube and all that. You can kind of have a pretty broad view of history. If I
Hmm.
want to see what, certain things look like back, 50, 60 years ago, I can, but it certainly doesn't beat having been there. I
Yeah.
mean, being there is a whole nother animal.
Yeah, for sure. So who are your main inspirations as a photographer, and do you try to channel their techniques and photographic styles in the way that you photograph people?
I'd say when I started out, I was into photographers like Niels Lozauer, who has been shooting since I'd say the early 70s and photographed pretty much anybody and everybody, and
Hmm.
was the personal photographer for Van Halen, and was kind of like the photographer who shot all of that 80s hair rock,
Yeah.
Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, you name it. Ross Helfand, who shoots for Metallica, Def Leppard, all
Oh yeah.
those bands, and Ken Settle, who's a photographer down the road in Detroit, which has a phenomenal body of work. Um, he kind of came up shooting Bob Seger when he was
Hmm.
a kid, and then just kind of pursued that. I think he was with Cream magazine
Hmm.
back in the day, and saw his shots in Hit Parader and all that. But also, somebody like a Jim Marshall, who was one of the first photographers for, say, Rolling Stone, and
Hmm.
Baron Woolman, who was a photographer over at Rolling Stone. Um, those guys were amazing as far as what they captured, as far as the emotional
Yeah.
quality. In back then, you had all access at a certain level, which you don't have today, and nobody really, looked at a lot of that stuff and thought, oh, well, there's going to be a value in this
Yeah.
stuff. So it's just kind of interesting to see that. But I also like a lot of street
Hmm.
photographers, I'll come across on Instagram, and I
Yeah.
love the emotional quality of that. I mean, at some level, it's all kind of photojournalism, and just being able to recognize a moment and take a picture when that moment happens,
Yeah.
and hopefully form some sort of a emotional connection that others kind of connect with.
Yeah, I really love like coming across those posts on Instagram of someone like pulling up next to someone and taking a picture of their car and then printing it out in their own car and then handing it to the person. I've seen those a lot
Sure.
recently, especially, and I don't know, I think it takes a special gift to capture a moment in someone's life from a onlooking perspective and then present that to that person, I think that definitely takes a special gift.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time to kind of to build that,
Hmm.
in intuition and that instinct, just to be able to see those things. And I mean, when you're looking through a camera lens, it narrows that focus down on what you're looking for and what you're looking at.
Hmm.
But that's all transferable stuff. I mean, it's just, essentially recognizing an opportunity. So if you can recognize an opportunity there, maybe you can recognize an opportunity somewhere else in, kind of in another framework, if you will.
Hmm. So, what is the best venue that you've been to photograph a show? Because you said that lighting is always changing everything, but what's the best venue that you think you've been to shoot a band?
Um, Best venue doesn't necessarily, I guess, mean best lighting. I
Hmm.
mean, a venue that I've always enjoyed around where I live is Kalamazoo State Theater. And,
Okay.
these state theaters are just amazing places. It's the old, they don't build them that way
Yeah,
anymore.
for sure.
So to go in there, I mean, just, taking the fact, being a photographer out of the equation, but just simply from the fact of, you're going to go enjoy a show.
Yep.
Those theaters are wonderful places to be able to have that experience.
Yep.
So it's not just the band or the performer that you're watching, it's just the venue, and
Yeah.
that's all part of the experience. Nowadays, I mean, you're going into this place, it's just you know, piece of concrete,
Yeah.
and you got plastic seats, and there's nothing um that great about it. I mean, it's cool, you're able to see a certain artist, sure, yeah, but it's not like the architecture knocks your socks off or anything like that.
Yeah, we've got a lot of theaters like that up here in Indiana, especially more towards like the Fort Wayne area,
Sure.
that I love going to see shows at just because they have like the dome architecture up top and
Oh
you
yeah.
you look up and all the lights are going off. It really looks like a separate landscape on the ceiling.
Right.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. Just the atmosphere of those older theaters and everything, and the generations of people that have sat in those chairs before you to witness
Oh,
operas and plays and everything, aside from loud rock concerts. It's
oh
really cool to think
yeah.
about. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's funny because I'm sure that the people who built them, had them built, never envisioned,
Oh yeah.
certain artists in there. But I think, I tip my hat to those who have preserved those
Yeah.
venues and have, given the dollars to make sure that they can be preserved for future generations. I think that's pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Sorry about my cat jumping up here. He just
Oh
decided
no,
that.
I love
Yeah.
cats. What's your
Yeah.
cat's name?
His name's Gibson.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. He's a little bit of a troublemaker. Yep, trying to bite me right now. So, okay, chill out, dude. All right. Um, so last question I'm gonna ask you is, what advice would you give to aspiring concert photographers looking to break into the industry?
Well, I mean, I think that, you just, I mean, first of all, you need to find a publication to shoot for,
Mhm.
whether it's a online publication or it's an actual print publication, but of course you don't have that as much as you used to. And then it's just a matter of kind of developing a body of work. But one thing, I mean, just go out there and, shoot some of your local bands. That's kind of a good way to get your feet wet, uh, take a look at photographs that inspire you, that other people have taken. You know, that's kind of a good way to draw inspiration. And not just music photography, look at other things, it's
Mhm.
about capturing a moment. What do you like about certain aesthetics of a picture? But I think you just, it's the lack of better words. You just kind of got to go out there and do it. And it sometimes takes time to build those skills, and a lot of it is going to be instinct and intuition.
Mhm.
And I think to have maybe a library of photographs that you like over, say, a span of history. You like the way this was captured, that was captured. I mean, I can look at things that I've taken and say, well, okay, yeah, that's similar to this person's picture, to that person's picture, because that had an influence on me. And I think that's always a good starting point to kind of try to replicate what you like, and then kind of build off of there and just find new things.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that war photography is very interesting just because of
Sure.
everything that's going on in the moment, and there's just those one, not even really candid images, but just almost awe-striking images, really, that kind of just reach out and grab you. I always think those are very captivating.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're talking about making a decision in the moment where your life is on the line,
Yeah,
because the photograph that you see, you don't necessarily see what's going on around.
hmm,
And I think, from a historical perspective, yeah, a lot of those photographs really hit home, change history, and you know, they a still photograph still can make more of an impact than, say, video, because you're
yeah,
taking one frame and it has a certain emotional connection and quality. But I mean, war photographers, I mean, there's many people who've paid, such a great price
yeah,
to take a photo. It could be their last photo.
yeah,
But some of those photos can change the trajectory of history. It has an effect on, what a perception people have,
yeah,
image people have of certain things that are going on. And there's some level that maybe some of those photographs were more important back then,
mm,
because we didn't have all, the internet as we do, social media, where, you can see what's going on in an instant. You might not have seen certain photographs until weeks later,
yeah,
say if you're talking about like the 60s, or, even World War II.
yeah,
And so now it's like, somebody takes a picture, within a few minutes, you're going to see that picture. I'm
yeah.
going to see that picture. And, but yeah, I think that, war photography, something like that, you've really got to have a certain something on a number of levels to be able to operate in that type of a manner.
All right, so I just thought of another question I'll
Sure.
ask you real quick.
Yeah.
So do you think that people having smartphones and basically having a DSLR camera in their pocket at all times has changed the trajectory or outlook of photography and the meaning of it? Or do you think it's relatively stayed the same?
Well, um, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things to think about. There's a level that I would say is it kind of cheapens things.
Hmm.
We all use the word content, oh, a content creator and all that.
Yeah,
So the value of what's created, because everybody can create it. I mean, maybe you want to look at it at an economics level. Everybody can do these things at a certain level. So then there's a certain level that the value of that goes down. I mean, it'd be like, what if you had a whole, go back to the 80s, 90s, what if you had a whole basketball league and everybody in that league, no matter what team, played with the same ability as Michael Jordan?
yeah.
Uh,
I mean,
I
that would be
don't,
fun to watch. That would be
it
fun
would
to
it would
watch,
be
but
fun to
yeah.
watch, but I mean, I think you it's cool because you could be somewhere and something that's newsworthy happens, and you could be the one to capture that.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a great advantage to, having this phone where you can do everything and then you post it and then it gets picked up.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a certain level of, I mean, you saw it, probably about 15 years ago where everybody was, well, digital photography, blah, blah, blah. And now the smartphone thing, and
Hmm.
people were against it. Now you've got the whole thing with AI.
Yep.
Um, what's going to happen is going to happen. You're going to have this, and you have had this whole change where everybody can do all those things, and AI is going to be a huge shift for a lot of these things. I mean, I don't foresee any of that stuff
Yep.
stopping. But if I still want to shoot film, I can shoot film. I mean, you, me, whoever, you can do what you want, choose to be a participant in certain things. That's, your choice, my choice. But the trajectory and all that stuff is sped up. I remember when we got,
Yeah.
for lack of better words, the popular internet as it is in the early mid 90s.
Mm.
And you think about, the level of innovation that you saw on, say, a yearly basis. It was nothing like it is today. I mean, it's like a month is like a few years when
Oh
you see
yeah.
all the stuff that's coming out, and then you've had all these um, kids who were born into this. So that's just
Hmm.
the norm for them. And they've already got those skills where 1994, it was rare that somebody had certain skills so they could capitalize on that more. But now it's like, well, everybody can do that. So
Yeah.
it's just, it's a whole different ball game as far as that stuff goes. I mean, not just photography, but yeah, I mean, I think photography has been something, in the area where I've been, where I've seen the changes. But I think people appreciate seeing photos from the 90s because there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of people photographing that stuff back then. I'd go and shoot a show, and maybe it was just myself and the guy or girl from the daily newspaper, and that was
Hmm.
it. And so, I mean, I always enjoy seeing, people who shot stuff back then start scanning their pictures in or putting videos up.
Yeah.
It's an important part of history and culture, and just kind of to be able to take a step back in time.
Yeah. Well, Paul, I really appreciate you coming on. I think it's been a great interview. Really appreciate you answering all these questions and giving some insight on your time as a concert photographer in the 90s, in the era that we all love so much. Is there anything you want to shout out or add before we end it off?
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. I
Of
really
course.
appreciate that, and I've always appreciated you re-sharing the posts that
Hmm.
I've posted. So that means a lot. If anybody wants to find me online, I mean, probably the easiest place is Paul Jendrasiak
Yep.
photography.com, and my last name is spelled Jendrasiak, and on Instagram, in most socials, it's just Paul Jendrasiak, so pretty easy to find. But
Yep. And I'll link
I
everything in the description for you.
yeah, that's
Yep.
great. But yeah, I always enjoy connecting with folks from that era. It's fun to kind of you know relive that music with folks who were there, and it's always cool to see folks who are, in their 20s, who are now discovering Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, Paul, I really appreciate it. Thank you once again for coming on.
Thank you. My
Yeah.
pleasure. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was awesome.
All
So,
right.
Paul,
Thanks, Ryan.
yeah.
Take
Um,
care.
yeah, take care.
All right.
So everyone, I hope you enjoyed that. Great interview with Paul Jendrasiak, one of our favorite photographers from the era. Um, Really awesome guy. Go check out his work. I'll link it in the description below. But if you guys want to see any other interviews, we'll try to get people on. Yeah, hope you guys did enjoy Puddle of Grunge podcast this week. I'm Ryan. Peace out, guys.